So what I'm trying to present to you now is based on conversations in the last 10 days with decision makers, Turkish ambassadors in the key European capitals, people in Ankara, above all people in Berlin and Stockholm. And as you will imagine, everywhere people are worried. I was literally in Stockholm on Friday when the head of the migration board in Sweden said, we have no more bed available. We've tried every bed in every school and we can't cope anymore. I met people in the Ministry of Justice and in the Prime Minister's office who are really at a loss. There's one thing they're not at a loss about. They all know what they would like. And I think this is very important as a starting point. Angela Merkel agrees on this with Viktor Orban. Everybody wants control in the Aegean. You might disagree how many people will come, what Europe should do, but everybody wants to end the situation where the borders are wide open and uncontrolled. The problem is not there. The problem is, how do you achieve that? So if people tell you, if Viktor Orban tells you, let's close the borders, and then he doesn't explain how, you can dismiss it as the cheap populism that it is. Fundamentally, there are two false, fake answers that have been given to this question. One is the idea that all it takes is a message. You hear that a lot. Let's send a message. Well, I tell you, the Swedes have been sending a lot of very clear messages the last 6 weeks. Viktor Orban said Angela Merkel just needs to say a word. It will stop. Let me remind you that the German Minister of Interior, de Maizière, said in 23rd of August this year, Thomas de Maizière, that 800,000 people will be coming to Germany. That was before Angela Merkel said a word. This is before she said anything. Angela Merkel did not cause this crisis. Hungary, in June this year, said it can no longer cope with the numbers and wants to suspend the Dublin rules. It was the first country to suspend Dublin, it was Hungary. And it said the boat is full, we can no longer cope. So it's not about messaging. It's not that Syrians will think, wait, we get a little bit less money and we might not have a nice bed within a week and then we won't come and leave. Particularly since many people see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now and the alternatives are so bad. What's the alternative cliche or fake answer? Just be tough. We hear that too. Again, the far right says it, some European governments say it. Just, we need to stop being so soft. We need to stop being so liberal, as Viktor Orban would put it. Just send Frontex to Greece. Just close the border. Please, close the border. But how do you close the border in the Aegean? I was in Warsaw 10 days ago talking to Frontex, off the record, but in great detail. But I tell you, you don't need to talk to Frontex, you can talk to any border expert. There is nothing Frontex, the Greek border guards, the Greek coast guards, the German coast guards, anybody could do in the Aegean today to stop boats arriving in Greece. Well, there is something. That's what the Thai military did at some times. Thailand, I just remind you, did not sign the Refugee Convention. And what the Thai military has done at times is when boats with Muslim refugees come from Bangladesh or Myanmar, they arrive at the Thai coast, they pull them out into the water, destroy their motors, and let them die. This happened in 2009, this happened in 2011. But short of shooting at or killing the little boats that arrive at the Greek islands, under international and European law, and under Greek law of course, you either rescue the boat when it reaches Greek water and take people to the island, or the boat reaches the island. And then you arrive in Lesbos, Kos, Samos, and all the other islands. There is nothing more Frontex could do about this, and Frontex are the first ones to admit it. So if everybody says we need to have control in the border, but you can't build a fence on water, and it's not just international law and morality, but also practicalities of geography that tell you that if the country with the largest number of refugees in the world today, which is Turkey, and the largest refugee population in the world today, which is Syrians, and 100%, last year it was 95% chance of getting asylum in the EU, when you reach that island, which is 2 or 10 kilometers away, there is nothing you can do to stop people once they're on the water to reach the European Union. And then stopping them somewhere in the Balkans is obviously not going to work either. I mean, we have many attempts, here a fence, then people are redirected, there a fence. In the end, people will go to Albania and cross the Adriatic, or they will go into Bosnia and cross into Croatia. The idea that you can build a fence that cuts off the Balkans in any foreseeable time frame is just, well, you know how this fence would look. It would be like the Iron Curtain that took a while to construct and only worked because it was deadly. So, if this doesn't work, what's the solution? Well, the only way you can control the border, in particular on water, is in cooperation with the neighbor. This is true everywhere. It's true. It's what Spain does with Morocco. It's what happens in West Africa with the Canary Islands. You know, it's what Italy did with Albania in the late 90s, when the Albanians just outlawed every boat on the Aegean coast. And after a few 100,000 people went to Italy, that stopped. Now, in this case, it is Turkey. And it's not that we weaken our negotiating position by admitting that without Turkish support, this flow of people will not stop. And this is something Angela Merkel recognized relatively early. And we wrote this in mid-September. But the question is, what follows from this? How, first of all, can Turkey help us? Well, there's this idea in the EU that Turkey should just stop. I've heard this actually being said. Turkey should stop sending us refugees. Now you have a border with Turkey, and you know that the number of Turkish border guards south of your land border is probably 10 times the number of border guards Bulgaria has on the land border. The reality is that Turkey is stopping refugees reaching Bulgaria. And Turkey has been picking up 60,000 people with its coast guard on the waters. But when Turkey picks up a boat, it takes it back to the land, and then 3 days later, people try again. When the Turkish Coast Guard stops a boat and the boat capsizes, it has to rescue people. While it rescues people, which is a complicated, long operation to get everybody out of the water, 20 boats drive past the Coast Guard. So again, if you know anything about border management on water, you know that unless Turkey builds an iron curtain along the west coast, which it will not do to please us, unless it has as ruthless a regime as the Soviet bloc had in the Cold War along its western border, Turkey will not be able to stop people. The pull is too big. So what is to be done? Here was a proposal we made now 2 months ago. Recognizing that the only way you can control the Aegean is with Turkey, and recognizing that neither Greece nor Turkey alone can stop people, the only way to deal with this is if Turkey and Greece agree that anybody who reaches the Greek islands is going to be taken back to Turkey and not to the Greek mainland. They have a readmission agreement, which is in force since 2002, so 13 years. Now, in order to do that, there are lots of technical issues. Greece needs to recognize that Turkey is a safe third country, which means a country safe for refugees. Don't mix it up with the human rights situation of Turkish citizens who apply for asylum in the EU. That's a different issue. But if Turkey is a safe country for refugees, which we've argued in a paper it is, and UNHCR agreed with us, then as a safe country for refugees, Greece can reject applications as unwarranted. It still has to accept them. It can't push people back. They still reach the Greek islands. But after 2 weeks, in accordance with EU-compatible Greek law, Greece can send people back to Turkey. If this would happen for 6 weeks, then the flow would stop or diminish dramatically. But in order to do that, you need one key ingredient. You need Turkey to accept people. Now, Turkey has signed this readmission agreement 13 years ago, and it has refused to implement it. Now, in Turkey, in Ankara, the view is very strong. It says, we will not be the buffer state for the EU. We have the largest number of refugees in our country. We will try to prevent some leaving, but we will not take them back just to do a pleasure to the EU. So last year, to give you the figure, 2014, in the end, with this readmission agreement with Greece, Turkey took back 6 people in the whole year. Now, how do you change that? Because this has to be changed. If this is not discussed at the summit next Sunday, the discussions are meaningless. If Turkey says, we will make an effort, we will try harder, we will send a few more boats, it won't really affect the numbers. However much money you give to Turkey. Turkey needs to commit to fully implement from a certain date the readmission agreement it has with Greece. And this too has now in the last 2 weeks been recognized in Berlin. The German Vice Chancellor, the German Chancellor, the Foreign Minister have said it increasingly. But for this to happen, which is very unpopular, and there's a second thing Turkey needs to do which is unpopular, which is to offer the Syrians in Turkey a perspective of finding a future there, opening the labor market, building schools, really basically accepting that there might be a new minority in Turkey, a Syrian minority, that will likely be there for a very long time, if not forever. For Turkey to do these things, the EU needs to be serious. And the EU has not been serious. What we've been offering has not been serious. We have not even offered until now what for Turkey is a sine qua non condition. Immediate, or immediate within the next few months, because it takes 6 months to do it, visa liberalization for Turkish tourists. The 3 months tourist visa, that you don't need that anymore. This is in the declarations. We will study it, we will accelerate, we will look into it. Turkey has said for 10 years, in the context of negotiating readmission, it will only take back people if the visa requirement is lifted. It will only take back people if this is lifted. And every Turkish ambassador repeats that. So for us to say that perhaps we will study it in April, and then it will take 6 months to implement the moment the Commission starts, means that Turkey will start taking people back. Well, it's taking back a few, that it will continue, but really, perhaps in 2017. That is not a solution. But there is a second thing that the EU would need to do, or rather, the EU cannot do it. And here I slightly disagree with the emphasis of Almut. I do not think a joint European solution is possible because in the EU, very few countries are affected. I was in Poland. The Polish government looks at this as an ideological issue. It's not a practical one. Nobody comes to Poland. Same, we have a president in the Czech Republic who goes to anti-Islamophobic demonstrations this week, or last week. We have a prime minister in Hungary who builds his career on creating fear of Muslims. And a lot of countries in Western Europe don't really get many refugees. There will be no agreement on what is essential for Turkey to take back people from Greece, which is massive resettlement of registered families of Syrians from Turkey to the EU in an orderly way. Last week, the Vice Chancellor of Germany said for the first time in public that Germany must be prepared, if necessary, to unilaterally take contingents of hundreds of thousands of people directly from Turkey to Germany. And the Foreign Minister, Mr. Steinmeier, said the same just a few days ago on his Facebook page. This is the only way this can be solved. And there is no way this can be agreed on the EU level. There will be no EU contingent, because too many EU countries will fight it. They are not concerned. They don't have a crisis. So what is needed is that those countries that are concerned, Turkey, Sweden, Austria, and others, perhaps Bulgaria, symbolically say, we are going to form a coalition of willing states, and we're going to offer Ankara a clear deal. You take back the people who reach the Greek islands, implement the readmission agreement, so we have control in the Aegean, and we will take back a set and clear number, a contingent of people whose identity we know. They will be whole families, so this issue of family reunification is clear. They can be the vulnerable groups. And the end result is that we actually do something which is fair. We are sharing the responsibility for the biggest humanitarian and refugee catastrophe in the world today. Last point, if we fail, because I think at the moment there are still too many illusions. The Germans recognize what the solution should be like. In Sweden, the debate has started. But there is still this idea, perhaps we get a European solution. I don't think that will work. And you still need to persuade the Turks that that is in their interest. I think it is, and that's a separate debate. But what if we fail today in the world? If this fails, we can abolish the Refugee Convention. Because actually, this year, 2/3 of all asylum applications in the world will be delivered in 3 countries: Sweden, Austria, and Germany. The international asylum system rests today on 3 countries. To put it in perspective, last year, Australia, in the whole year, received 9,000 asylum applications. That's as many as people arrive in Germany every day, and as people arrive in Sweden every week at the moment. Canada, Australia, Japan, 5,000 applications in the year. South Korea, 2,500. The rich countries in the world don't take part in the international asylum regime. So if the European Union opts out, we don't need asylum. I mean, we don't actually. The United States is the only country that every year takes 75,000 people chosen by UNHCR as resettlement. But hardly anybody else does. Secondly, we will see the rise of the far right everywhere. An anti-Muslim, anti-refugee, illiberal, and pro-Putin coalition. And we already see that. In Sweden, the Swedish Democrats are now the #1 party in the opinion polls. In Austria, the liberal, the Freedom Party, the far-right, so-called Freedom Party, won more than 30% in Vienna. Hungary, Central Europe is already there. And finally, we will see, of course, and we see at the moment, almost 1 million children, Syrian refugees in Lebanon, in Jordan, and of course in Turkey, who will spend years without going to any school. And if we are worried about the radicalization of the region, if we are worried, what do we do with ISIS in Syria? And we have 1 million children as refugees with no future, no education, under desperate conditions. I don't think we need to talk more about the strategic importance of finding a solution with Turkey, that is the country hosting most refugees today, that will actually help provide better conditions for the biggest refugee crisis that we face in the world at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Just a very short question again. The circumstances are exactly as you described them in the last 4 years. Why did the refugee crisis erupt exactly this year, this summer?
That's a very good question, because if we look at the numbers, what we see is very interesting. We see that the numbers of people, if we look at Frontex, that reach the European Union by irregularly or illegally crossing the borders has remained stable. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. It didn't slowly rise. In fact, 2011 it was 140,000, 2012 it was 75,000. On average it's about 100,000 people that cross into the EU and that Frontex describes. Suddenly in 2014 the number spikes, it blows up. And this year it's an explosion. And this year we will have as many people arrive in the EU in this way as in the 10 years before. So something happened in 2014 and reinforced now. And it's clear what has happened, is that the Syrian refugees living in Turkey and in neighboring countries have recognized that they are not going to go back to Syria. I mean, last year you saw the rise of ISIS in Syria, and you also saw the consolidation of the position of Assad. With Assad not likely to fall, and now with the Russian intervention even less likely to fall, the majority of refugees who fled to Turkey fled from Assad and have realized they will not go back. And since they cannot integrate in Turkey, and since their savings are running out, they discovered, and this then spreads, that there is an almost certain way into the EU. Because despite the deaths in the Aegean, 99.95% of people this year who tried to cross succeeded. So it's 0.05% of people. This is a lot, 40 times less dangerous than if you cross from Libya. So this is really geography, a concentration of people, and the sense that Syria is hopeless and will not allow any returns, and so with the certainty of getting asylum in the EU, you better use the chance while you can.
So you see no relation